We continue now at the top of Daf 25a Daf and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 25a. The Gemara is continuing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that according to Rabbi Tarfon, if you have Karen in the Rishus HaNizik, the payment is going to be Nezek Sholem. Even though Karen in Rishus HaRabim is Chatzi Nezek, but in the Rishus HaNizik it's Nezek Sholem. And Rabbi Tarfon learns that from a Kal V'chomer, because Rabbi Tarfon understands that if we say that Karen in Rishus HaRabim is going to pay Chatzi Nezek, whereas Shein and Regel in Rishus HaRabim pay nothing, so in the Rishus HaNizik where Shein and Regel pay Nezek Sholem, certainly Karen should pay Nezek Sholem. And the Tana Kamma responded to Rabbi Tarfon and said, you can't make such a Kal V'chomer because that violates the law of Dayo. The law of Dayo says that when you make a Kal V'chomer, you can't go beyond the source. If the source of your Kal V'chomer is Karen in Rishus HaRabim, which pays Chatzi Nezek, so then the Karen in the Rishus HaNizik can't be Nezek Sholem and can't go beyond the source, the original source of the Kal V'chomer. And now Rabbi Tarfon responds to the Tana Kamma and says, Lo adon Karen mi Karen. I'm not really learning Karen from Karen. Ani adon Karen mi Regel. I'm actually learning Karen from Regel. If in an area where we're lenient on Shein and Regel in Rishus HaRabim, because again, Shein and Regel in Rishus HaRabim pay nothing. Hechmir b'Karen, so we're strict by Karen, you pay Chatzi Nezek. Mokom shehechmir al Shein v'al Regel b'Rishus HaNizik. So if you're in an area where we're strict by Shein and Regel in the Rishus HaNizik where they have to pay full, Eino din shenachmir b'Karen. Shouldn't we also say that we're strict by Karen and the payment is Nezek Sholem? But Amru lo, but the Chachamim say back to Rabbi Tarfon, that's still the same exact problem of Dayo. Dayo lavo min adin lios kanidon. Again, if you're learning from a source, a Kal V'chomer, you can't go beyond the source. Ma b'Rishus HaRabim chatzi nezek, af b'Rishus HaNizik chatzi nezek. Ultimately, Karen in Rishus HaRabim is chatzi nezek. So the most you can say is that Karen in Rishus HaNizik would be chatzi nezek. And Rashi explains, Lo adon Karen mi Karen. Rabbi Tarfon responds, I'm not really learning Karen from Karen, Kedamran La'el, like it was phrased earlier. Ela Karen mi Regel. I'm actually learning Karen from Regel. Mokom shehechmer ola b'Shein v'Regel, eino din shenachmer b'Karen. If we're already being strict in this particular case by Shein and Regel, certainly we should be strict by Karen. And they respond the same thing. Dayo lovum and adin lios kanidon. You're still essentially running into the problem of Dayo, the sof, because at the end of the day, ilav Karen b'Rishus HaRabim. If not for your source of Karen in Rishus HaRabim, lo mishtakach sad Kal V'chomer, you don't have the Kal V'chomer. The only way you have the Kal V'chomer is to understand that Karen in Rishus HaRabim is Chatzi Nezek, but since Karen in Rishus HaRabim is Chatzi Nezek, that restricts your Kal V'chomer to Chatzi Nezek. You can't say, according to the Chachamim, that if you have Karen in the Rishus HaNizik, it's going to be Nezek Sholem. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Tarfon lesle Dayo. Does Rabbi Tarfon not agree with the principle of Dayo? Essentially, it seems like from the Mishnah, Rabbi Tarfon is disagreeing with the principle of Dayo and saying that a Kal V'chomer can go beyond the source. But the Gemara says, V'hadayo do raisu, but Dayo is a din mido raisa, as Rashi explains. V'hadayo do raisu, the Tanya gabe Yud Gimel Midos. We have a brisa by the Yud Gimel Midos, B'Toras Kohanim, in the Medrash of Toras Kohanim. He din Kal V'chomer, talks about the Kal V'chomer, and says as follows. And the Gemara continues, the Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, he din Kal V'chomer. Kate said, how do you learn things from a Kal V'chomer? As follows. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, V'yavia yorok yorak b'foneh. If her father would spit in her face, this is talking about Miriam, if her father would reprimand her, halosi kolim shivas yamim, wouldn't she be humiliated for 7 days? And so therefore we should make a Kal V'chomer if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is reprimanding her. Kal V'chomer l'shchina arba asar yom. So it's a Kal V'chomer really for the Shechina. The Shechina should be beyond her father. It should be 14 days, but we don't say that. We said that Miriam was sent out of the camp for only 7 days. Why not 14 days? Eladayo lavo min adin lios kanidon, because if you're going to learn now from a Kal V'chomer, it cannot go beyond the source. That's the principle of Dayo, and it should seem that everybody agrees to that principle, even Rabbi Tarfon. And the Gemara answers, Ki lesle Dayo. Rabbi Tarfon, when does he not hold of Dayo? He only does not apply Dayo in the following situation, Heichot demifrach Kal V'chomer, in a situation where the Kal V'chomer would be refuted. Meaning to say, if you have no Kal V'chomer without getting rid of the principle of Dayo, so then we actually would get rid of the principle of Dayo, and we would expand the opportunity of the Kal V'chomer to cover even beyond the source. However, Heichad lo mifrach Kal V'chomer. However, if the Kal V'chomer is not refuted, if it's possible to have a Kal V'chomer even with the Dayo restriction, so Islay Dayo. So then he does hold of Dayo, and therefore again, Rabbi Tarfon does hold of Dayo, where Dayo is not necessary for the Kal V'chomer. If you're able to employ Dayo and still have a Kal V'chomer, so then he holds of Dayo. But if you're not able to have any Kal V'chomer without getting getting rid of the principle of dayo, so then he gets rid of the principle of dayo. And the Gemara explains, Hasam over there, Shiva deshchina lo ksivi. It never says anything about 7 days, that she has to leave the camp for 7 days because of the shchina. Asa kal v'chomer, I see our besar. So comes the kal v'chomer, and logically it should really be 14 days. It should be more than if she was reprimanded by her father. And asa dayo apik shiva v'uki shiva. But comes along the principle of dayo and says, we're going to take out 7 of the days because you can't go beyond the source, and she only has to leave the camp for 7 days, meaning to say that you can use the principle of dayo in that case and you still have a kal v'chomer, because it never said anything about what happens when someone is reprimanded by the shechina, and so therefore we can say the kal v'chomer teaches that she has to leave the camp for 7 days. Aval hacha, but over here, when you're talking about chatzi nezek or nezek shalom in the Rishus HaNizek, we already know chatzi nezek. You don't need a kal v'chomer. Chatzi nezek siv, it already says chatzi nezek. That's not only by Rishus HaRavim, that certainly would apply by the Rishus HaNizek as well. V'yasa kal v'chomer v'aisi chatzi nezek achrina. The kal v'chomer is coming along and saying that you have to pay another chatzi nezek. You have to pay nezek shalom. V'nasa nezek shalom, that in the Rishus HaNizek it has to be nezek shalom. And he darash the dayo, if you're now going to employ the rule of dayo and then take away that extra chatzi nezek, so afrechle kal v'chomer, then you don't have any kal v'chomer. And so that's why Rabbi Tarfon makes that distinction. Rabbi Tarfon says in a situation where if you're going to use dayo, you have no kal v'chomer, so there you do not use dayo. That's why in the situation by Miriam, Rabbi Tarfon is able to use dayo, but when it comes to nezek shalom, in the Rishus HaNizek, Rabbi Tarfon does not use the principle of dayo. And the Gemara continues, v'Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan respond to Rabbi Tarfon, shiva de shchina ksivi. It's not true. It does say that she's sent out of the camp for 7 days when she's reprimanded by the shchina, because it says in the pasuk tisager shivas yamim. It says that she's going to have to be isolated for 7 days. That's talking about the shechina as well, and so therefore it's not true. You actually, in that situation, according to the Rabbanan, it says 7 days, and still we're employing the idea of dayo. You see that we employ dayo even in a situation where the kal v'chomer would be refuted, where there would be no kal v'chomer. Rabbi Tarfon says no. Ahu tisager the darshin on dayo. No, that whole tisager, that is the source of the concept of dayo. So you can't bring that pasuk and say this is a situation where the kal v'chomer is refuted. But the Rabbanan respond, no, ksiv kra achrina. There's actually another pasuk that says vatisager Miriam. It says that Miriam, she was quarantined, and so therefore you have the pasuk twice. One time it teaches the concept of dayo, but one time you see that the concept of dayo applies even in a situation where otherwise you would have no kal v'chomer. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Tarfon, what does he do with the pasuk of Atisager Miriam? Hahuda afilu bi'alma darshin and dayo. That pasuk is needed. The reason why it repeats itself is to say that even in normal situations we would employ the rule of dayo. Velo tomar, because maybe you would say, you shouldn't say hacham mishum kvodo shel Moshe. Maybe the only reason we're employing dayo over here is out of respect for Moshe Rabbeinu. Miriam was Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, and so therefore maybe we don't want to send her out of the camp for more than 7 days. So we employ dayo. Maybe we wouldn't employ it in other situations. Aval bi'al malo. Maybe in other situations we wouldn't. Kamash malan. That's why the pasuk repeats. The pasuk repeats to say that this is a rule that we employ everywhere. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Papa li Abaya. Rav Papa says to Abaya, V'hai Tana, but what about the following Tana? The lo dorish dayo. This Tana is going to ignore the rule of dayo, and is going to use the kal v'chomer and go beyond the original source. V'af hagav, the lo mifrach kal v'chomer, even though it's a situation where the kal v'chomer is not refuted, meaning even though it's a situation where the kal v'chomer would be perfectly good, even without ignoring the rule of dayo, still this Tana is going to ignore the rule of dayo. And again, we said above that everybody should agree to dayo, at least in some situations. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, keri bezav minayin. How do we know that keri is tameh when it comes to a zav? A zav is a male who has an irregular emission, and keri is like a regular emission. And the halacha is, or the brisa is asking, how do we know that when it comes to a zav who sees keri, that keri is going to be tameh not only in maga, not only if it touches something, but also in masa, also if it is carried. And the brisa, the Tana of the brisa, has the following kal v'chomer. Vidinu, it's the following kal v'chomer that tells us that by a zav the keri is tameh. Matahar b'tahar tameh b'tameh. If you have, let's say, something that comes out, a liquid that comes out of the body that is generally going to be pure when it comes out of a pure person. Let's say the spit of a person is generally considered pure, so it's actually considered impure when it comes out of somebody who is tameh. So if that's the case, so tameh b'tar, so if you have something like keri, which even by a pure person is going to be tameh, so eino din sheyeh tameh b'tameh, certainly if it comes out of an impure person, if it comes out of a zav, it is certainly going to be tameh. And so essentially the Bryce is arguing, since in general keri is tamei, so therefore if it comes out of a zav, it's going to be tamei. Now that would be a perfectly logical kal v'chomer, but the problem is v'kamaisi la bein lamaga bein lamasa. But the Bryce, the town of the Bryce, is using this kal v'chomer to say that the keri is tamei not only in touching, because we understand that keri in general is tamei when it touches something, but it's going even further and saying that it's tamei even if it's carried, and so therefore we're ignoring the rule of dayo over here. And so that's what the Gemara asks, v'amai, why are we saying that the kal v'chomer goes so far as to say that the keri that comes from a zav is tamei b'masa? Name it, what we should say is as follows: ahani kal v'chomer lamaga. The kal v'chomer is effective to say that the keri that comes out of the zav is tamei in terms of maga, and ahani dayo lafuke masa. But the dayo rule should be employed to say that there is no tumas masa. And the Gemara says, V'chi now if you're going to say, L'maga lo itzrich kal v'chomer, maybe you're going to say that the kal v'chomer isn't needed for maga, the lo gora migavra tar, because like we said, keri is always going to be tamei maga, even by a person that's tar, and so maybe this is a situation where the kal v'chomer is refuted. There is no kal v'chomer unless we ignore dayo, but that's not true, because itzrich, we do need the kal v'chomer, even for maga when it comes to a zav. Why? Because one might have thought, mikre laila ksiv, when it talks about keri, it talks about mikre laila, meaning to say that it was an emission, it was a seminal emission that happened at night, meaning misha kiryo gorimlo, that's what caused it to happen. Yatza zeh, but in this situation where the person is a zav, that's generally considered to be like a kind of an illness, shein kiryo gorimlo, so it's not mikre laila, it didn't happen in the normal fashion that a person becomes a bal keri. Eladavar acher gorimlo, something else caused that. This illness, the fact that he was a zav, caused the keri, so therefore you might have said that the keri by a zav wouldn't be tamei maga, so therefore, Kamash Malon, therefore that is what the Kal V'chomer could be teaching us. The Kal V'chomer could be teaching us Tumas Maga when it comes to keri, and therefore we should not ignore the rule of Daya. We should not expand the Kal V'chomer beyond that and say that there's Tumas Masa as well. And the Gemara says to that, not necessarily Midi V'lo Davar Acher Ksiv. It never says anywhere that there can't be anything else causing the keri. And so therefore, since it never really says that, it's included automatically. We would assume that the keri by a zav is tamei just like the keri by anyone else, and therefore this is a situation where the kal v'chomer is refuted. There is no kal v'chomer unless we ignore dayo, and that's why in this case we ignore the rule of dayo, and we say the keri by a zav is tamei even b'masa. And the Gemara continues, Uman tana deshamat leid yamar shichva zera shel zav mitame b'masa. Now who is this tana that is saying that the shichva zera of a zav is tamei not only in maga but also in masa? The Gemara says, Lo Rabbi Eliezer v'lo Rabbi Yoshua. It doesn't seem to be Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yoshua. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, shichva zera shel zav, it says the shichva zera of a zav, again the shichva zera is the same essentially as keri, mitami b'maga vein mitami b'masa, that has tumas maga but not tumas masa. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. You see clearly that Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with the above Tan in the Brisa. Rabbi Yoshua, when Rabbi Yoshua says af mitami b'masa, that the shichva zera of a zav is mitami b'masa, offhand that does seem to be the same as the Tana above. However, Rabbi Yoshua finishes lefi she'i efshar below tzich ziva, because every shichva zera of a zav is going to have some ziva as well, and that's why it's tamei b'masa. So even Rabbi Yoshua, Adkan lo kamer Rabbi Yoshua hasam, Rabbi Yoshua only said over there that it's tamei b'masa, ela she'efshar below tzich ziva, because we say that there must be some mixture of ziva within the shichva zera. Halav hachi, but if not for that fact, lo, then it wouldn't be tamei b'masa. And the Tan in the Brisa above is saying that the keri itself, the shichva zera itself, is tamei b'masa, and so therefore again it doesn't seem like that Tana fits with Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yoshua. And so the Gemara says, Elahai Tanahu de Tanan, rather the Tana of the Brisa is the same as the Tana in the following Mishnah. Lemala mehen, it says above them in terms of levels of Tumah. Rashi says first, Uman Tana de Shamat le de Kamar de Mihai Kal V'chomer, Mapik Maga Umasa. Who is this Tana who learns from the Kal V'chomer both Maga and Masa by Shichva Zera? Moni lo Rabbi Eliezer v'lo Rabbi Yoshua. It doesn't seem to be Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yoshua. And so the Gemara continued and brought a Mishnah from Kalim. It says, Lamala mihen, meaning above them, Mishlosha avos hatumos de sheretz, v'shechva zera v'tamei meis de katani la'el, mehach maslisim v'meseches Kalim, ve'ina metamen el b'maga, meaning above that level, above the level of sheretz and shechva zera and tamei meis, where we say the only kind of tumah is tumas maga, there's a higher level than that, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 25a Amud Beis.